You know, it strikes me what's interesting about the moment we're in right now is that we in the media are treating Vice President Harris like we treat a normal politician, and we're critiquing her answers, and we're talking about, well, she could have said this differently, she could have said that differently. Meanwhile, the Republican nominee literally is talking about liberals being the enemy within, talking about using the military to go after these people. His defenders say, oh no, he's talking about going after illegal immigrants, or he's going after mobs in the street. And Trump will say, no. I mean, going after the Pelosi's, going after Adam Schiff, going after Democrats. And these campaigns are in two different universes.
Yep. I mean, yeah, I agree, Jake, but could you reiterate that to the host on your right, please?
Well, I'll just tell you what I'm hearing from people who I have been talking to, and that is that if her goal was to close the deal, they're not sure she did that. And, you know, some people have asked, is she being held to a different standard? Maybe, but that's maybe the world that she's living in. And
the message was clear from Vice President Kamala Harris during her CNN town hall on Wednesday night. Her Republican rival Donald Trump is, quote, unstable and unfit to serve. The Democratic nominee's message was squarely focused on warning Americans, particularly undecided independents and moderate Republicans, that Trump poses a threat to the nation's core principles, oftentimes citing the words of aides and allies closest to him. She particularly pointed to former senior military figures in Trump's administration who have called him a fascist, and claimed that the former president spoke glowingly of the loyalty of Hitler's Nazi generals.
He commented more than once that, you know, that Hitler did some good things too. And of course, if you know history, again, I think he's lacking in that. But if you know what Hitler was all about, it'd be pretty hard to make an argument that he did anything good.
So what would you say when he said to you that Hitler did a lot of good things?
Well, I tell him that. I said, you know, first of all, you should never say that.
You've quoted General Milley calling Donald Trump a fascist. You yourself have not used that word to describe him. Let me ask you tonight, do you think Donald Trump is a fascist?
Yes, I do. Yes, I do.
But she also raised concerns over his comments about turning the US military against, quote, enemies within, which, as we know via her appearance on Fox News last week, was a poignant moment and demonstrated her unwavering ability to hold not only Trump to account, but those who try and sane-wash his message.
The question to the former president today, Harris Faulkner had a town hall, and this is how he responded.
I heard about that. They were saying I was like threatening. I'm not threatening anybody. They're the ones doing the threatening. They do phony investigations. I've been investigated more than Alphonse Capone. He was the greatest gangster. No, it's true. But think of it. It's called weaponization of government. It's a terrible thing.
So,
Brett, I'm sorry, and with all due respect, that clip was not what he has been saying about the enemy within that he has repeated when he's speaking about the American people. That's not what you just showed.
Well, he was asked about that specific...
No, that's not what you just showed. In all fairness and respect to you.
That was the question that we asked him.
You didn't show that, and here's the bottom line. He has repeated it many times, and you and I both know that. And you and I both know that he has talked about turning the American military on the American people. He has talked about going after people who are engaged in peaceful protest. He has talked about locking people up because they disagree with him. This is a democracy. And in a democracy, the president of the United States, in the United States of America, should be willing to be able to handle criticism without saying he'd lock people up for doing it.
And the thing is, sane washing was not on the cards for CNN anchor Jake Tapper as he used his time on air to highlight the stark difference in how both political candidates are held to a different standard regarding their policy positions and rhetoric. He simply pointed out that while Kamala Harris is treated like a politician, held to a high standard regarding the specificity of her answers, private bone spurs and the tale of the cancer-causing windmills is not.
Whether or not she's being held to a different standard.
Yeah.
I mean, Donald Trump, we invited Donald Trump to be here. This is supposed to be a debate night. She accepted. He did not. So we said, okay, let's have 2 town halls. She accepted. He did not. The reason that we are not critiquing Donald Trump's performance at a town hall this evening is because Donald Trump did not agree to participate in a town hall here in Delaware County, and she did. So
look, Kamala Harris and Donald Trump are not taking the same exam.
Yeah.
And I think it bothers people. They're not taking the same exam. He gets to be lawless. She has to be flawless. That's what's unfair.
That's
what's unfair. That's what's unfair tonight. That's what's unfair tonight. They're not taking the same exam. Look, she has policies. She may not articulate them perfectly every time. She may not put the stories in the right places, but she's fighting for actual ideas that will help real people. And he's talking about people's penises. And so they are not taking the same exam. And that's pissing people off. It's pissing me off.
You know, it strikes me what's interesting about the moment we're in right now is that we in the media are treating Vice President Harris like we treat a normal politician, and we're critiquing her answers, and we're talking about, well, she could have said this differently, she could have said that differently. Meanwhile, the Republican nominee literally is talking about liberals being the enemy within, talking about using the military to go after these people. His defenders say, oh no, he's talking about going after illegal immigrants, or he's going after mobs in the street. And Trump will say, no. I mean, going after the Pelosi's, going after Adam Schiff, going after Democrats. And these campaigns are in two different universes.
Yep. Instead, you'll find many in the media making excuses for the most inflammatory comments he's made. I mean, I should be surprised that a Fox News host is trying to spin his comments praising Hitler, but, here we are.
So will any of these amount to the so-called October surprises that can sometimes impact elections just 12 days out? Let's bring in Howie Kurtz, host of Media Buzz. Howie, great to have you here. There's obviously a lot of stuff being thrown at the wall here. And the question is, do you think, given the state of this race, that any of this sticks or that it changes anyone's opinions this late in the game?
Well, first of all, I think that John Kelly is a highly respected four-star who lost a son in Afghanistan, and I don't believe that he is making things up, and nobody can really know what the private conversations may have been. However, at the same time, Trump may have just been letting off steam about the loyalty he wanted from his generals compared to what he thought about Hitler's generals. And I think that it's obviously not something that was made for public consumption. I think if these things were said, it was not an effort to say anything publicly about that. But his accusations are not going to move 10 votes.
But the bottom line is, if you read H.R. McMaster's book, who is critical of President Trump in some of it and not in others, he talks about how Madison Kelly didn't like the president. And they didn't think he deserved the job, or they didn't think he was worthy of the job. And they went out of his way to make sure a lot of the things they asked him to do that they didn't like never got done. McMaster would be frustrated because he couldn't get their attention. And he would say, it's not your job to rein in the president. It's your job to do what the president wants. And then you factor in the fact that he runs his own company, coming from the business world, the first one we've ever had. It's not even a public company. And then he obviously has frustration. And I could absolutely see him go, now, you know what? It would be great to have German generals that actually do what we asked them to do, knowing that's a third, maybe not fully being cognizant of the third rail of German generals were Nazis and whatever.
And it is with that host Jake Tapper simply stated these two campaigns are in different universes. And while Harris was focused on putting the former Trump aides and military leaders' comments in front of the Pennsylvania town hall crowd, she also detailed her own policy agenda. I mean, not to the standard of concepts of a plan that we've heard from the other side, but near enough.
Thank you, Anderson. Thank you both for being here.
Thank you, Eric.
So my question is concerning groceries. Grocery prices have gone up quite a bit in the last 4 years. Yeah. And some people blame former President Trump. Some people blame President Biden. Who would you say is correct? And what would you do to bring prices down for Americans?
Thank you, Eric. And you're absolutely right. You know it. I know it. I think most Americans know it. Price of groceries is still too high. And we need to address it in a number of ways. One of my aspects of doing what we need to do to bring down the cost of living for working people and the middle class in America is to address the issue of grocery prices. Part of my background and how I come to it is probably a new approach grounded in a lot of my experiences as a former attorney general, where I took on price gouging. And part of my plan is to create a new approach that is the first time that we will have a national ban on price gouging, which is companies taking advantage of the desperation and need of the American consumer and jacking up prices without any consequence or accountability. So that is one way. But to your point, Eric, there are a number of issues that we need to address in terms of bringing down the cost of living. It includes what we need is a new approach that I bring to the issue of affordable housing, including, for example, rent. And again, I bring to it my experience, knowing what has been happening in terms of how corporations have been buying up blocks of property to diminish competition and then rents get jacked up, and addressing that, both in terms of making sure that there is a consequence and accountability for that, but also investing in people's dreams of home ownership, you know, knowing that for too long, frankly, both administrations in both parties, Democrats and Republicans, haven't done enough to deal with the issue of housing. And we need a new approach that includes working with the private sector. I say that as a devout public servant, working with the private sector to cut through the red tape, working with home builders, working with developers to create tax incentives so that we can create more housing supply and bring down the price.
Of course, Trump was swift to respond on Truth Social, accusing Harris of dangerous rhetoric. I mean, dear God, irony had no comment, particularly taking issue with her quoting words from Trump's own former chief of staff, which I don't know how many times this needs to be pointed out, right? Harris isn't up there calling Trump Hitler, which Jake Tapper specified. She's simply repeating that those closest to him have said these things. I mean, hell, even his current VP candidate likened him to Hitler. So let's not play this game of Kamala Harris spreading dangerous rhetoric.
The most damning critiques of Donald Trump and the most dire warnings about what it would mean if he came back into the White House came from people who served him closest in his administration in the most sensitive and important positions. Let me just go through a few of them. I've written them down so that I don't leave any out, but I'm going to leave some out because there are a lot. Obviously, there's his former vice president. There's Rex Tillerson, who was his Secretary of State. Bill Barr, who was Attorney General. John Kelly, Mark Milley, Mark Esper, who was his defense secretary. Jim Mattis, who was his earlier defense secretary. Dan Coates, who was in charge of the national intelligence. All of these people have come out to issue dire warnings about Donald Trump. And George, I have to say, it's not just the people that have come out publicly. A lot of others, and you can see them in that they are not endorsing Trump, but they're not speaking publicly. They're worried about the feedback. Let me just read you something that an anonymous, very top official who spent every day time with Donald Trump, served more than a year's administration, told me about Donald Trump. Trump lacks any shred of human decency, humility, or caring. He is a traitor and a malignancy in our nation and represents a clear and present danger to our democracy and rule of law. Again, that is somebody who, just like John Kelly, who was with Trump every day for more than a year in the White House.
Traitor. Let's put that graphic back up there because I want to make a point here. When you see that graphic of all the people who surrounded Donald Trump, these are the people that were in the Situation Room during the times of crisis. If Donald Trump is elected again, none of those people will be there.
Well, I've spoken to Trump many times about some of these people that have crossed him, and I asked him what his next administration would be like. What he's told me is he didn't know anybody. He had to rely on advice to hire people last time. Now he knows people. He will put people in who are loyal to him. He will put people in that will carry out his orders.
The guardrails will be gone.
She's just quoting the people that Trump decided to hire verbatim.
Love this video? Make sure you stay up to date on the latest breaking news and all things Meidas by signing up to the MeidasTouch newsletter at MeidasTouch.com/newsletter.